So, I wanted to talk about the opening of John's Gospel, and in particular, what we see there going on with this. It's almost a version of a creation story that we have in the first few verses actually, of the first chapter. So, that's what we're talking about. And one of the things about John's Gospel is that there are many things about it that make it seem as if the author of the gospel really did have a Greek audience in mind. And we can see that in lots of different ways throughout the gospel itself. But in particular, what we see is at the very opening few verses. So that's what we're talking about here. John, the first few verses of John chapter 1. And what's actually happening there, and this is actually can be a little bit difficult or a little bit uncomfortable actually for some people to try to wrap their minds around, but it's what's going on, right? What we see happening there is it looks like the author is using a form or a version, maybe a simplified version, of a Greek creation story. There are several that are out there, and this one is working with this idea of the logos, right? So in English, we would write that L-O-G-S. If you'll bear with me here on that O, L-O-G-S. And this is what, when we have words like biology, anything that ends with an L-O-G-Y, that comes from this Greek word, logos. And so the Greek word logos itself has several different meanings. Word is one of them. Mind sometimes is the way this word is translated. It's also used to refer to matter as in stuff, not that doesn't matter, but stuff. Matter. So that's what we're working with here. And that's what we see in the Greek in the opening of John's chapter, is this reference to logos. So I want to draw a kind of a picture, if you will, of the way this Greek creation story and the use of the logos worked in their story or their understanding of things. So we have kind of some sort of ambiguous shape. And the way it's talked about is that this logos itself, it was matter, physical matter, that they talked about as being pre-existent, meaning as long as there has been time, this stuff existed. So you can probably hear how that sounds quite similar to God, right? That most people think of God as kind of being outside of time and always eternally existing, those kinds of things, right? So it becomes this very interesting theory for people to try to wrap their mind around, to talk about both God as eternal and a realm of stuff, matter that exists eternally. So there's this idea. Okay, so the thing is, this eternally existent matter, logos, was used to create everything that exists, right? So it's kind of this amorphous, without shape stuff that a creator God used to create everything. And the way it's talked about in this, when it's talked about in stories, is that it's out of the fullness of this logos, or the overflow of this logos. So fullness, this is a term we see quite a few times throughout John's Gospel, but this concept of the overflow of the logos is how things came into being. So in the Greek creation story, this is the idea of we get, trees, right? And we have grass, and all of this is coming out of the overflow of the logos. I'll make it a happy person, right? So, and these kind of overflows of the fullness are referred to as emanations, right? So, nothing came into being without the logos in this Greek creation story, right? And out of the fullness of the logos is where all of this stuff came into being. So, that story, predates Jesus by several hundred years. I can't pinpoint it right now. I think it's at least 200, maybe 300 years that this idea was floating around in the Greek atmosphere, if you will. So think about that there's one other thing about this. The Logos itself is talked about, right, as kind of eternally existing. There's also this really interesting idea, and that is that the closer the Logos itself is drawn to God, and humans or the creation itself is on some level drawn towards God, and there's this element of the closer we draw to the source or to God, the more God-like we become. And so there is this very Greek kind of an idea of all things longing for or themselves being drawn toward God. So I want you to have all those things in mind as I read the first couple verses of John's Gospel that is essentially taking this idea and working with it here, ultimately in reference to Jesus. But so here are the first few verses. In the beginning was the Word. So that's Logos. In the beginning was the Logos. And the Logos was moving toward God. And the Logos was God. All very Greek ideas. Also, a side note, the most English translations will say, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. With God, moving toward God. The moving toward is actually what I see in the Greek in this. And so I find it fascinating that English translations don't reflect that, because I think it would make it a little bit more clear that it is drawing on this Greek idea. But anyway, he or it was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being. So it's like they're literally just taking this creation story and applying it to Jesus. We have more that kind of goes on. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness did not overcome it, and there we're seeing those other Johannine themes. But we have couple other references. He was in the world came into being through him, right? This idea, nothing came into being without him. And then there's also a reference to the fullness of the Logos in this opening chapter. So, what do you make of that, right? The adaptation of a Greek creation story in order to say something essentially very cosmic and godlike about Jesus in John's Gospel.